Okay, we will make a start. As ever, I will begin with karakia. Kia hora ti marina, kia whakapapa po namu ti moana. He hui arahi la tātou I te rangi nei, araha atu, araha mai, tātou e tātou katoa, hui tāki e. Yes, this calm greenstone. All right. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Coleman toku inga. Kia ora, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's Afterschool special, looking at the science curriculum, phases 1 to 4, year 0 to 10. I am delighted, as ever, to be joined by my expert guide, Leanne, and hopefully to be joined also by Sarah a little bit later on in the session. She's just coming from something else, as our international guest, juggling the time zone as well. So the approach to this will essentially be, I've made a little resource. The link is in the chat, and I will pop it up so we can share the screen. And we'll kind of talk our way through that as a prompt. But please feel free, if you have questions or comments or any of those kinds of things, to pop them in the chat. And then, as you'll see at the end of the resource, there's some links to other places and spaces to go to. Obviously, we are still very early days in looking through this document. It has only been out for a matter of weeks, 2 weeks, I think. So still quite a lot to unpack, and it's quite a dense document, so it will take a bit of time, but we're hopeful this can at least start that conversation. Okay, then do you want to just say hello?
Yeah, kia ora koutou everyone. Ulienso tōku ingoa, he kākoutou tai au I tauranga moana. I'm a science teacher in the Bay of Plenty area. Some of the other hats I wear, I'm also a co-founder and co-director at Bay Science, which is kind of a very grassroots and progressive science education association, if I was to try and sum it up. Other hats I wear are regional rep for NZASC and also the Secondary Chemistry Educators NZ Association. These days, though, I tend to find myself more busy with Bay Science, just because I like to get up and kind of get involved, which I guess is kind of how I find myself here today. I'm wondering, Claire, can the audience see the website, and should we scroll through that and use that as prompts? Yeah. Hello, Claire. Oh, yeah.
Yep. I'm just going to... Yeah. Yep, that was the idea. I was just thinking while I...
So I guess while we're kind of waiting for the website to kind of be shared with you so you can kind of see what we're going to be talking about, we thought it would be quite fitting to open tonight's kōrero with, getting a couple of ideas around how people feel about sustainability and climate change in science education. It's obviously something that's been floating around.
Sorry, a manner of technical issues right now.
Excellent, there it is. So
I'm just having technical tips. Just carry on.
Right, as long as people can see it, right? So on August 12th, on that Wednesday, this supposed finalised, and I'll talk to finalised a little bit more, finalised science curriculum was released, and I booked myself into a Tauranga Moana Biosecurity Capital Excellence Symposium on that Thursday to try and surround myself with actual scientists, but also people that work with science as well. So we're talking like people in environmental care that might be involved in, say, your local, regional or city council, but also our environmental care groups as well, like those volunteer groups and charitable trusts and stuff like that. And interestingly, overwhelmingly, the big issue that we're facing in today's world is climate change. And that is something that doesn't surprise me at all and should not surprise any science teacher that's been following the science education literature at all, because we know that there is a PISA Science 2025 framework. By the way, those results come out on September the 8th. There is a PISA Science 2025 science framework and a supporting document, agency in the Anthropocene, which I know that our lovely National Science Teacher Associations also know about, because through my regional rep roles, they know that I quite stubbornly and unapologetically talk about the importance of including climate change education in a science curriculum or some kind of science program, and stuff like agency and the Anthropocene, and teaching about Anthropocene sort of context. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be exposing our students to. There's been a lot of commentary in the media, including, I think, something that came out basically, I think, on Friday the 14th or Thursday the 13th, which included commentary from the lovely Professor Chris Eames. He happens to be co-author to the agency in the Afterschool document, and maybe clear that's something we need to link again to the bottom of this website now that I think of it. Yes, Greta, great to see you here. Climate change is the biggest issue of our time. And I think no matter how you spin the missing terms of climate change in a curriculum, right? Even if you just put the words back in, it's such a big evolving issue that it can't just be like the way I'm looking at this draft. You can't just have a small topic called climate change and think you're done with it. Like, it reaches into every single part. So some of the examples that were coming out were something as simple as shipping routes through the Red Sea. As a result of climate change, pests were changing their movement patterns and were more likely to be stowaways on ships. It's things like recognizing that within New Zealand as well, we're probably going to be likely to see a movement of pest species from one region to another, that growers, our primary production industry, are going to need to rethink their habits, or not their habits, but rethink what they might be able to grow or produce in their region in the future. So if you just have this one topic, climate change, it's not enough to do that. The thing about climate change needs to also be referred to again. Say if you're teaching a topic about food production in New Zealand, or say if you're teaching a topic about, if it might be in social science, something about shipping routes, if that's in there. I haven't looked at the social sciences one. I think for me, something that's really disappointing looking at this August 12th draft, and I don't apologize for being disappointed, is that actually in our phase 1 to 4 and phase 5 feedback, we actually referred to the PISA science framework and agency in the Anthropocene. And we closed off our phase 5 feedback, also saying that at the very end, that when this basically October 2025 draft came out, around that same time frame, there already was a media and AI literacy framework that had come out, and there's also a climate literacy framework that has come out as well. And it's just kind of like, well, why aren't we looking at these things? Like, we're basically saying, like, if PISA is the sort of international benchmark that compares different education, systems around the world, we're basically being told, like, these are the sorts of attitude, skills, values, and teaching contexts in science that we need to prioritize. But for some reason, we're not doing that in this Wednesday, 12th of August draft. Not drafted, finalized. I keep calling it a draft because I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be finalized.
Yes, I think that happened to us in the social sciences as well. I mean, I in terms of it being a draft, I suppose they have said they'll go back now and add some climate change bits. So I suppose on that level, there is a sense that something else will be done. But in the meantime, while that was going on, we got Sarah's joined us. Hello.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I promise I'm not driving. I'm just in the car.
Okay, all right.
I'm not driving.
Lovely. I don't want to take responsibility for anyone's injury. We were just talking. Lee was just leading with the conversation about the sustainability climate change issue that I think everyone's probably well aware of in terms of what came out on August 12th. Do you want to add into that at all, Sarah, and introduce yourself?
No, I'll just toko that. I mean, I think that is shocking, to be honest. That's not the kind of a thing that you forget. in the Anthropocene. We just sort of forgot to include sustainability and climate change. So I'm not quite sure how that came about, but I feel like there's probably more to it than we're being told. But that there's going to be a revisit. It's interesting. But I mean, just in general, I would agree that I don't think it's a curriculum for this particular period of time. I don't think it's a curriculum for the Anthropocene. So that to me, I mean, that in general, I think I take that from multiple aspects of this draft. And the fact that climate change was completely left out is just indicative of this larger problem, that it's not a curriculum for these times.
Okay, well, I did say we would try to mosey our way through this PowerPoint/website that I've made in a vague attempt to, which we'll keep doing. So maybe I think probably one of the first things to say is, having moved back to this, is that this finalish version, maybe, of the science curriculum is quite a different version than the draft. Do you feel, Leon, like the considerable feedback that was provided has been listened to, and that's what's led to some of this change?
So something I did try to do between August 12th and tonight was to very painfully look through the Wednesday 12 release, but also the 300 pages of 700 comments and annotations that people wrote and typed, to try and find a few things that, find evidence to see if some of the feedback had actually been taken on board, or if some things are actually missing. I apologize if you can hear the flipping of pages. I've got an A3 printout of the August 12th release. So a couple of things. Let's see. So August 12th, Year 2, observing materials take up space, full stop. Previously, this was materials take up space and have mass. So it's pleasing to see comments number 093 and 094 saying that this was way too early. The concept of mass for Year 2 has been taken on board. Now, that bit about materials take up space and have mass, that ending bit, have mass, has gone up to Year 5. And so it's kind of like, it's great that they have recognized that this concept of materials take up space and have mass is something that might be too difficult for Year 2s. But I'm not sure if that has been addressed when that mass concept is in Year 5 as well. And my gut feeling is mass versus weight. It's quite a tricky thing. Like kids in Year 10 and Year 11 are still mentally, trying to negotiate that in their heads as well. Mm-hmm. In the October 2025 draft, there was a little bit in ecosystems, and that has now been deleted. And in that draft, that October 2025 draft, under ecosystems, comment number 86, someone actually wrote, "So much potential for infusing te ao Māori, where is it?" And so now that there's no ecosystems in Year 1, I think that potential has been shut down. Mm-hmm. And I think if I think about some of the people who were at our hui and were writing these comments and annotations, and I remember their faces, I remember our interactions, it's very hard for me to think, okay, so what are some of the things that they value in this curriculum? And it's quite clear that teachers want to see more mātauranga Māori incorporated within this curriculum, and I think we're about to see less of it as well. When you look at that October 2025 draft, there's actually quite a few examples in there, I think, that are like New Zealand-based examples. And one that I remember is at some point there was a EG with a were kōkako, and that's something that stands out to me because kōkako happens to be one of my favourite birds. So one of the first things I did with this graph was actually do a Control F and look up, this is my favourite native bird and its related mushroom. Still in here and it's not, which makes me a bit sad. But it also makes me kind of realise that actually, yeah, some of these pages do include Aotearoa New Zealand examples, but there will be pages and sections that don't. And so if I'm thinking about what is it about this curriculum that makes it New Zealand, what is it that makes this a New Zealand curriculum? If someone showed you some of these sections or pages, you wouldn't know that it was a New Zealand curriculum unless someone told you that it was. And that doesn't quite sit comfortably with me, partly because I remember back when I first started teaching and I was trying to learn more about how to be a culturally responsive teacher. We had observations and things. It was little things like, okay, when you walk into a classroom, how do you know that this is a New Zealand classroom? So applying that same thinking, I'm looking at this curriculum, I'm thinking, how do I know that this is a New Zealand curriculum? And there are some traces of it, but it's just a little bit sad when there are just fewer examples of those things that make us uniquely Kiwis.
So Sarah, in terms of that, then I think this is probably going back out and then going back in again. If you think about this from the question of what the purpose and vision of science is, and the comment was made yesterday in the social sciences again that it was positioning history as a very static kind of thing that you go and open your dusty book and that kind of thinking. How does this final curriculum stack up in terms of how it conceptualizes science, and then how does that sit with the international space?
Okay, so
Sarah is going to talk, Leon. Shush.
You go, Sarah. You start.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a couple of things, and I wholeheartedly agree with Leon on this, and I also felt it doesn't feel like a curriculum from New Zealand. And there are a couple of examples here and there, and a couple of, I guess, that they've made some sort of more directed attempts to include language and or examples, but it's not really reflective of a treaty partnership kind of approach. And that is disappointing and continues to be disappointing, has been disappointing with every draft that we've seen to date of the curriculum under the current government. The curriculum draft under the current government, but yeah, it's not reflective of a good treaty partnership, and it's not reflective of what teachers or kaiako in Aotearoa are actually doing. And that's disappointing as well, especially the leaders on the ground like Leon and others that I continue to work with, and who are doing really great work in this space. And the curriculum, it feels like a step back from what kaiako are actually already doing and working towards, and their aspirations for their future practice. Right. So that is disappointing. And in terms of the framework, I don't actually. And I don't think we've been informed yet what the framework really is for the science learning area or the curriculum overall, right? So that was the other piece of this is, even in its attempt to sort of appear as something that's universal or neutral, which I don't think exists. Like there's no such thing as neutrality. There's the appearance of neutrality, but the appearance of neutrality in and of itself is a position when we look at what's not in the curriculum, right? Like we just talked about. So that's not a real thing. But yeah, that there's no real framework that I can see that from what I know of the sort of very rich and vast discussions, and there are debates within the field, right? And that teachers are aware of, but also within the field of science education, scholarship and research and practice around how we best prepare students in the Anthropocene, how we best engage them in understanding how scientific knowledge is constructed, and how do we take that apart together? How do we practice it? How do we make sense of it? And particularly now in the age of AI, that becomes even more important. There's no real framework. There's nothing that I can see that's there. There are little bits of things that maybe have come from PISA in response to feedback, or the critique that there was no really epistemic knowledge domain, that there were just these discrete practices that actually weren't scientific practices in the prior draft. So there's some attempt at compensating for that based on the feedback, but it doesn't seem like a meaningful and coherent framework that has informed this updated version.
I do think it's interesting that they've included this conceptual mapping document now as part of the file downloads that go when you go into Tarangi to look at the sites, and they've listed these new underpinning kind of conceptual things are now across the top around the knowledge and practices, because that's a new element into the mix.
So I noticed the earth science and earth and space elements have been combined. When I look at those elements, they resemble, to me at least, I think I'm not sure, but they resemble to me a little bit like some of Win Harlan's big ideas. And I don't have the personal resources and by that I mean time, to open both Win Harlan's documents, which is, and I know she's passed now, but which are still available online, and to just check the teaching sequence progressions to see if they actually match what was maybe proposed by Win. In terms of, coming back to that purpose, far out, like, I don't think the science curriculum is preparing students for the Anthropocene at all, or a age shaped by global uncertainty and new technologies like AI. Something that keeps coming back in my head is still the whakatauki. It's got in the purpose statement: by great thought the house is built, by knowledge it is made firm. And the last time I was on here for a webinar, I wanted to know where this whakatauki had come from, and I know you can find it in the 2007 curriculum. But as I kept hoping for a response or some kind of answer, I think for me it doesn't actually, like, I'm less concerned about the origins of it. But I think part of why it kept coming back to my head was because a couple of years ago, one of our amazing PLD facilitators at NZASC was doing PLD during the changes to level 1. So there's a copy of Imagining Decolonization by B.W.B. Tex. And what's interesting is when Moana Jackson writes a piece in here, he talks about how each society has a house with similar foundations, but each is organized differently based on the people's specific beliefs, history, environment, and resources. Each house is adorned with its own art traditions, etiquette, myths, stories, and music. Each home was built by its owners over centuries of change and improvement, etc. And when I'm reading this purpose statement, whakatauki, I'm wondering if the intent of it during the 2007 curriculum was to kind of represent something like, all learners coming into your classroom with their own funds of knowledge, or if it was or if the other interpretation was, is it referring to the science learning area as a house, in which case it goes back to, if we're removing some of these New Zealand examples, what are we replacing the traditions, etiquette, stories, and music, etc. with? And that sits a little bit uncomfortably with me, but I'm not really expert enough to dive too deep into it and be able to comment much more. So it's kind of like I'm saying this out loud because I'm like, if there's anyone out there that might be able to lend that extra bit of insight, because I'm not an expert at this, but I would like to know, because science teachers, we want to be good treaty partners when we're teaching science in the classroom. And I think if you look back at science's history, you don't have to look very far to realize that the science system has meant that some people in societies have done really well, but also lots of people have missed out on opportunities as well. And that's not something I think we should be ignoring if we're going to be inclusive. Might be getting a bit deep, but yeah.
That's okay. That's all right. A bit deep is fine. If we come back to, keep that in the back of the brain, but if we come back to the nuts and bolts of things that have shifted in the curriculum document, how is the progression stuff? I know you talked about shifting a few things that have happened tangibly in the document, but does it, and obviously we still don't know what's coming with phase 5, although we've seen that draft content. How does it sit in terms of the leveling and the content? There's still a lot of content, right?
There is. And again, I think with the leveling, we need to actually go back to, and I think different teachers, depending on your experience, if we don't look further, we're going to look at the teaching sequence, and we're going to be like, oh yeah, I think I know what I'm supposed to teach. That is one of the positives about this curriculum. You can actually pick up the teaching sequence, look at it, and be like, oh yeah, I think I have a resource for that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think a lot of that also depends on, like, if you've been teaching for a while, you'll have access to those things. But the part that we're not sure of, or which I'm not sure of, is, say, that example before, all materials, something and have mass. If that's something that's still conceptually okay for year fives to learn about, even though it has been shifted from year one up to year five. And I'm thinking that actually we need to not just look to works like Win Harlan, because she's got progressions in there, organized by things that look like primary and middle school and also secondary. But also to then look at that and then come back and think, okay, will this actually work for our kids here in New Zealand? In terms of, I can see on the screen here, there's bullet points on contextualized learning, and there's stuff on matariki, maramataka, etc. And this kind of goes back to the idea of teaching in context as well. So the PISA science framework describes lots and lots of contexts relevant to the Anthropocene that all students should have some kind of exposure to by age 15 on all personal, local, national, and global levels. So we're talking maintenance of health, accidents, nutrition, vaccination, control of disease, social transmission, food choices, obesity, community health, pandemics, food security, healthy lifestyles. There's consumption of materials, food, energy, locally produced foods, vegetarian diets, maintenance of populations, energy supply, mining, renewables. I'm skipping past a couple now. Renewable, non-renewable energy, natural systems, sustainable use, population growth, sustainable recycling practice, reduction of resource use, population distribution, waste management, regenerative agriculture, sustainability, again, pollution, loss of soil, mass extinction, ocean acidification, earthquakes, severe weather, climate change threats, communication impacts, energy, industrial hazards, all of these things, new materials, genetic modification, health technology, transport, and AI, all of these contexts are things that this PISA science framework is saying, hey, around the world, we would like, and I get it, there's issues around, the style of assessment, but looking past that and looking at what they're trying to signal is important in this current era, students having the awareness of these sorts of contexts is important. And what's interesting about these contexts is that I would describe all of them as what David Perkins refers to as life-worthy. Life-worthy in the sense that it meets 4 criteria. Read my post-it note. They're rich in 4 things: opportunity, insight, action, and ethics. Opportunity, because these are things that present themselves to students' lives today and tomorrow. Insight, because they're actually rich in science concepts. In that massive list of contexts, which you can find in that PISA science framework, I can look at all of those and I can think of the science concepts that are connected to them. They also have to be rich in this third thing, action, which refers to okay, so now that I've learnt this as a student, what do I do with this information? What can I do with this now? And what can I do with it later? And that fourth pillar, ethics, is when you start to, I think, look at the interface of science and how it intersects with society. And I think when you have these contexts, they're all ethical issues because you require lots of different perspectives. And in New Zealand, this will include iwi, hapu, Māori champions and groups and stuff like that. If you're going to resolve any of these in New Zealand, if we have the science curriculum that's going to meet both what Peter Gluckman describes as a professional purpose, but also a citizenship purpose, I would make the argument that, yep, I think it's pretty clear that to prescribe something that's going to be compulsory to the point that, you have to be taking this science up to the end of year 11, and by the way, if you don't come to school, we might prosecute you for it. So this must be really important stuff to learn about. So these contexts are things that kids need to know about. Yeah. If we're talking about the professional purpose, I would also say that actually, based on what I've seen in my interactions with scientists at that symposium, if you're going to be a scientist working in New Zealand, you need to know how to be a scientist in New Zealand. What does it mean to be a scientist in New Zealand? You need to know how to negotiate and form partnerships, and not just tokenistic, contractual, transactional-based partnerships, but like actual long-term partnerships, I think, anyway. So if we're not including these contexts, we're actually missing out on a lot. And I think this is an important point to make, because I know I go on about teaching in context a lot, but it's not teaching in context for context's sake. It's teaching in context because it provides a doorway for the all Māori worldview to exist as well. And Sarah Talbot will know that just yesterday, the Science Learning Hub had this amazing panel of speakers, of which there's a recording to, and no doubt Greta will probably post a link in the chat. You need to hear the stories of what is happening in our schools across New Zealand, because this stuff is groundbreaking, and I think they're exemplary.
Yeah, I'll just add as well, and just to clarify my earlier comment, I think, and honestly, I haven't had enough time to go through all of the different documents, but I have been through the primary document here, and to me, the idea of a framework that is kind of that takes up what the piece the authors have been writing about, for example, and the authors who have developed that framework for science education in 2025 are from around the world. So they've been doing work in this space for quite some time. And these are people who have been doing work in this field for the past decades and are saying, okay, actually, this is where science education needs to go next, because we need to prepare children and young people for the world that we're facing today. And, there's very serious and complex and uncertain socioscientific challenges and that require deep conceptual understandings, but also that action-oriented competence. And so I don't see a framework. I mean, if we look at the last country, I think, and I could be wrong about this, so I have to fact check it a bit, but I know one of the countries to more recently go through a curriculum refresh was Singapore, and they've updated their curriculum with attention to values, ethics, practice. So you can kind of look and see what the possibilities are when a country does take into account some of these issues. And I think that was even before the latest PISA report came out about kind of what we need to be thinking about. But I do want to add that New Zealand was headed in this direction. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact that this has been so politicized, because the original curriculum draft committee that was made of kayako from across Aotearoa, as well as curriculum experts and a range of people with expertise in Matarango, Maori educators, for example, a really diverse collective of voices. And there was a process for working alongside Kura in developing a curriculum that would be exactly in line with some of what we're talking about now. And that effort was completely rubbished, I'll just say. That was intentionally and deliberately thwarted, which is very, I think, irresponsible when it comes to financial, responsibility in governance, but also that there was a lot of thinking there. So the point of what we're looking at today is very much a complete 180 from the direction that this work was going for the past couple of years before 2023. And I think it's important to keep in mind, because when people say, oh, that's really lofty and ambitious and probably too difficult to do, it was being done. It was in process and it was very rigorous, and it was very well vetted, but also it was a process, and it was early on. There was a process for bringing in Kura and getting all of this feedback and then trialing new versions. And I just don't think this consultative process has been very consultative. And I think that there's a reason for that. So it's a little bit better than the last draft, but
yeah. And you just kind of reminded me, but I think it was probably a couple of weeks ago, probably within the last month or two, I think Andrea Solins and Dr. Kathy Bunting have published something in the New Zealand Journal of Educational Studies, which speaks a little bit about some of the things that were in that 2023 draft and how it got overblown in the media, and the direction that 2023 draft was actually heading in. So if you want more info on that, you can actually find it in NZJES. I think something you also just reminded me as well, like in terms of, what does it mean to have a science curriculum that's relevant for today and tomorrow's world. And this kind of goes back to, like, I was looking at this teaching sequence, the August 12th teaching sequence, and I'm like, yeah, it is easy to pick up and teach from it. But it's also like the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, why are we teaching this? not how can I teach it. You need to ask yourself the why. And I think it goes back to this idea of value. So you as a science educator, for people listening, like, what is it that you value in education? And more specifically, what is it about science education that you value as well? And do those values align with maybe what students need and value themselves? I just kind of got like reminded in the past kind of 2 weeks, like, even before the Understand No Do framework, there was a NZ curriculum refresh progressions approach sort of thing that was commissioned. And so before the Understand No Do, I think there was a proposal to have a No Do and Be framework.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me go, well, I think this is something that's missing from our teaching sequence. I mean, yeah, the nature of science is still pretty weak as well and all that. But where's the part where we actually just grow young people? And where's the part that includes like the joy of learning? And how do we know that kids are growing their attitudes, values, and dispositions? And going back to that 2023 draft, there was a progression model from early childhood up to phase 5. And early childhood has being confident, curious learners. Phase 1, thriving in environments rich in literacy and numeracy. Phase 2, expanding horizons. Right? So now you're reaching out more. Expanding horizons of knowledge and collaborating. In phase 3, seeing ourselves in the wider world and advocating with and for others. Phase 4, having a purpose and being empathetic and resilient. Phase 5, navigating pathways and developing agency to help shape the future. And when I look at this model that is now, I think, missing in this teaching sequence, I think this is something we need to go back to. It's not just about what knowledge am I teaching, what practices am I teaching. It's actually about how do we grow our young people. And if I go back to this purpose statement again, it's a really, really weirdly worded, because this August 12th purpose statement opens with science is the systematic, dynamic, and evidence-based discipline, blah-de, 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 but it says, okay, so it's saying this is what science is. Then in the next paragraph, it's like science fosters students' learning area. So it's saying, okay, we're still talking about science. We're not talking about the science learning area. We're just still talking about science. So science fosters students' curiosity, all that stuff. And then at the very end, there's this one sentence. The science learning area prepares students with the knowledge and practices to access related curriculum subjects for year 11 to 13. So essentially the entire purpose is to prepare you for year 11 to 13. It doesn't actually answer necessarily. If you went back to that student-teacher assignment, why do I need to know this? Well, yeah, so you can access stuff at year 11 to 13. What about all those contexts, right? And that to me is a very jarring point.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to motivate primary school children to do their science, because it will be good for them when they get to year, you got to learn all this stuff so you can learn some more stuff. You can take it.
Sarah Talbot, you might be someone that's able to comment on it, but I believe that a little bit earlier, or towards the middle of the year, there was a Australasian Science Education Research Association conference, and they produced a white paper, Science Education Fit for the Future, which to me, when I give it the skim over, actually looks like what do we need to change at both at the practitioner, the researcher, and policy level, so that we can develop science education to be something that is relevant for the Anthropocene. And I do think there's a little sentence in here that uses Singapore as an example too.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the sort of shifts in curriculum over time, and curriculum should be responsive to what's going on around us in the world, and also what we've learned about students' participation and experiences in school science. And we have a couple of decades now of evidence around what's really working and what's not. And taking that into account alongside what's to come and what we think students need to be prepared for. And there are a lot of people working in the space of, for example, Vision 2 versus Vision 3 of scientific literacy, et cetera. And none of that really is evident throughout this document. But this document looks like something that might have been, developed maybe in the 90s when we were thinking about benchmarks for scientific literacy and those kinds of things. It looks very much like a Vision 1 version of scientific literacy. And so that, yes, it's accessible. And so there's an improvement there, I think, in terms of accessibility, some improvement in coherence. But those bigger questions that I think you're asking, Leanne, or, the bigger problems of the document and the approach have not been addressed at all.
And just kind of, I suppose, adding to that, because I'm a little bit of a nerd, but if people read the Base Science newsletters, there's a little section called Pivotal Perspectives where I try to share readings that I think are important. So another fun one, the Sustainable Development Goals Report of 2025. And in here, we've got under goal number 13, climate action. And if you look through it towards the very end on page 35, mainstreaming climate change concepts in education is still a work in progress. So this is something we need to still be thinking about and doing. Mainstreaming sustainable development and climate change into school curricula is a part of national commitments in the SDGs and Paris Agreement. And then the Royal Society of Chemistry overseas has published a 3-part series. I think it's called like Green Shoots or something. And in the 3rd part, they have these overall recommendations. And I thought, even though this is for phase 1 to 4, just want to throw it out there now. They have 8 recommendations in there. And so it's got recommendation 1, governments should encourage the linking of relevant regional, national, and global contexts related to sustainability and climate change. Now I wonder where I can find some of those regional, national, and global contexts. Maybe they were mentioned here today. Recommendation number 2, government should ensure that contemporary sustainability and climate change content is included within their national chemistry curriculums. If I was on the team putting together a phase 5 chemistry curriculum, I wonder where I could find some advice of what to include or what things to aim for. Oh, here's another one, recommendation 3. This one's for exam boards. I wonder who the exam board is in our country. Anyway, exam boards should include climate change and sustainability context within some exam questions. This should include both instances where the question is framed with the relevant context and opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge of real-world examples in their answers. Now, speaking of, I suppose, phase 5, I'll just remind that let's assume that the purpose of phase 5, in that draft still hasn't changed. So it's about preparing students for further study, like in the tertiary level. It's really interesting that general science as a subject is still not, it's still gone, and that education for sustainability as a subject is still gone. Now, in the present, right now, kids in year 12 and 13 can still take at their school general science, and they can still access, I believe, the education for sustainability standards, and they can use these achievement standards to gain accreditation, and basically that will give them a pathway into university. So it's this really weird thing going on where they're like, oh yeah, we want to prepare you to, be a scientist or an engineer, whatever it is in the future, but we're also going to close these doors that basically do the same thing. It just doesn't make sense. Other recommendations include governments should embed consideration of environmental impacts of practical chemistry, right? So this goes back into, okay, we're not saying get rid of the practicals, but this just kind of reminds me, there was I think it's in phase 3, and there's like a bunch of suggested equipment tools lists in this August 12th draft. And so one of the comments that someone picked up one of the comments that someone made about the October 2025 draft was they saw copper sulfate in there, and straight away they're thinking, okay, well, this is toxic to marine life, and they made that comment. And in this August 12 version, that copper sulfate is still there. So it's another example of feedback that hasn't been taken on board, unless maybe it has, and they thought, oh yeah, we want all these schools to be using copper sulfate en masse. Recommendation number 7, examples should embed environmental evaluations within their assessment frameworks for older students, ensuring sustainability considerations are integrated into their scientific learning and practice. And recommendation 8, micro-scale practical activities, so not en masse, as needed, or as little, as less impactful, negatively impactful as possible is how I interpret that. Sorry, I kind of go into little ranting mode,
No, but can I just add? I mean, I think some of the things you're saying, Leon, are also reflective of the fact that that there is no sort of indication that humans or human scientists or science is implicated in any of the problems or challenges we're facing today, and that there's no science as a human endeavor component. For example, there is a very rare, I think, here and there mention of humans' positive and negative effects on the environment, I think, in one of the objectives. So I feel like it's very reductionist. It sort of leaves the human out of things once again, and that to me is horrifying, but also shocking at the same time that we're still doing this. And so in a national curriculum document that's supposed to prepare students for this day and age. And then the other issue is we're facing a student disinterest crisis. I mean, there are a lot of science degree programs, and this is a piece I wrote a couple of years ago, where we're looking at declining enrollments in the sciences, and part of that is it's not exclusively a preparation problem, because this is a longstanding issue. But if we look at trends over time and surveys of student interest and student attitudes towards science, we're seeing a real decline. And so that's something that hasn't been taken up either. And that there was a youth advisory board a few years ago for the curriculum refresh. And I don't see any of their recommendations and what they said that they wanted for a curriculum refresh. The vision for young people that they developed is also completely absent. So I just want to put that out there as well.
Yes, so
I'm going to jump in, sorry, Lynn, just because I'm conscious of time. And I just wanted to speak to what Sarah's saying about that too. Like, in terms of the broader framing of what they're still calling Te Mataeho now, even though I think it doesn't bear much resemblance to the one that we were working under in 2023, that's still coming. So in terms of that framing in which this sits, but I think the comment that you made about the lack of human beingness is across this, both this and social science. Because again, it was the comment that was made yesterday in social sciences as well, that it was sort of this, collection of stuff, and it was this abstract thing. And yeah, still that kind of sense of sucking the joy out of it. I guess the question that I feel like maybe we need to think on just briefly, as we're now into our 5:20 sort of timetable, is what do we do with this? What should teachers be doing? What do we do with this now? We know that they are going to do something around this because of the lack of climate change. I don't know what that looks like. I know there have been some groups that are offered to assist the ministry with figuring out their sustainability, climate change aspects of this. But if the rest of it pretty much stays as is, how do we navigate our way through it? Anyone?
So, where do we start? So, August 12th release, if you go to the very first page, there's a section called About This Document. If you go to the very last page, it's like blank and like totally incomplete. There's a heading and then nothing else on the page. Interestingly, there's the bit at the front that says, the content of this document is proposed to be made by the Minister of Education as a national curriculum, once made and published in the New Zealand Gazette. And I believe NZAEE's webinar just gone spoke a little bit about that gazetting process, and I think their webinar is going to be recorded and uploaded too. A little bit further down, it does say, depending on their context, some schools may not be ready for full implementation on day one of the 2027 school year. So the following transition arrangements are proposed to apply. For students in years 0 to 8 schools, you will need to make a start by developing and then executing a plan that achieves full implementation by no later than the end of 2028. So a little bit of buffering for you. For students in years 9 and 10, schools will need to basically do the same by no later than the end of 2027. So you don't have to be 100% ready, all the unit plans good to go from the beginning of day one, term one is how I kind of read that. In terms of another question I think some people had kind of wanted to know more about was, okay, so, and this came through in the feedback as well, was, the nature of science was very, very weak, which meant that the procedural and epistemic knowledge and those pieces of statements were missing and very weakly signalled. And Sarah, you mentioned that earlier tonight as well. So I recommend looking at that PISA science framework and having a look at that list of all the different procedural and epistemic knowledge statements. I've gone through them and have a big list, which I won't read out because it's like a massive list, but just as an example of procedural knowledge, the concept of variables, including dependent, independent, and control variables. Now, if you look through the teaching sequence, you will see some reference to like fair testing and stuff like that. Within the whole teaching sequence itself, though, from year 1 to year 10, there's only 5 references to that. So page 14 in matter, interactions, and energy, page 15 in forces and motion, again on page 15, forces and motion, and twice again on page 25 for year 10, motion and forces. So the idea of the concept of variables, including dependent, independent, and control variables, it's not to say that it's totally absent in this August 12 release. It's to say that it appears in year 5 as one statement, appears in year 6 as one statement, appears twice in year 9 as one statement. So where's all the parts that kind of like are in between and build up is kind of my thing. And it's not just that particular knowledge statement in the procedural and epistemic knowledge lists. There's quite a few of them where you will see gaps. And so I think something to think about is if you're at a school that covers multiple year levels, think about how you might fill in some of those gaps. The other thing as well is if climate change comes back, which I hope it does, don't take the inclusion of the words a control F climate change at face value, because we know it's such a massive evolving system. It's a climate change polycrisis at this point. However, the New Zealand Association of Environmental Education is amazing, and they've been working with the Aotearoa Climate Education Coalition to put together some climate education guidelines, and I believe that these will be made available on the NZAEE website at some point in the near future. And I know that myself as a science teacher, I'm going to be looking at those as that extra bit of guidance to make sure that if there's any parts that are missing in terms of what makes an effective climate change education program in a science classroom, I'd like to look at that for advice as well.
Sarah?
No, I think that's great advice. There are a lot of organizations doing good work in this space that I think we can work together with and consult to look for guidance. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is probably where we are in terms of this. As you said, big picture concerns remain. There's a lot to digest. There's quite a lot of content still in this curriculum document. We were talking before, Len and I, about where are the opportunities to do things a little bit differently or do things in your local context. And I think that's going to have to be looking in around the edges maybe of that.
Yeah.
Can I share just one last thing?
Sure.
So yesterday afternoon, so Wednesdays, I'm very lucky that I don't teach period 4 and 5. So my partner and I went across to the Rotorua Energy Event Centre to check out for the second year in a row Te Tūkohu Ngā Whā Mātauranga Māori Science and Design Fair. And this is a science fair that enables entries from any age. It's run and designed by Te Arawa Lakes Trust. And all their categories are like, their environmental awards, their pest plant removal and all sorts of these things. And I saw projects there from kids that were like, they've identified catfish as a problem pest species in their lakes, and so they were catching them, but then thinking, okay, how can I turn this into something useful? And they were like testing it out as like some sort of catfish fertilizer. There were other projects there as well where, like last year, there was one where someone was looking at like natural sort of fungicides that they could use on flax. But anyway, it's a really cool event, and I think every school needs to be entering it to kind of show like, it's about giving it a go. But actually, if you as a teacher go for a little wee hikoi and walk around, and it's still open tomorrow until like 3:00, and you just look at some of those science fair boards, and they're all like really, really cool and really, really like environmental. on the way out, we talked to one of the organizers, and he was saying how like some of the judges find the judging really, really challenging. And this is something that stuck with us on the car ride on the way home. And he said something along the lines of how judges find the Mātauranga Māori science and design to be really hard to judge because these kids weren't just presenting what they found out, but they were telling the judges like their personal stories as well. And he was saying how like because the projects were more place-based, it was more than just a typical science fair. There was a relationship to what these kids were doing. They weren't just researching stuff. And so that's where the buy-in comes in from. So when we're enacting this curriculum on the classroom level, think about how you can do it locally in terms of places, people, and things that are around you that kids see and notice all the time. And how can you develop that over time?
I'll also just add, I mean, I think that's fantastic. And I think that there's a lot of similar work going on locally and regionally. And so I think being on the lookout for that and a lot of the work that, again, Kayako are already doing, as Leanne mentioned from the Science Learning Hub webinar yesterday, and they have a couple other events coming up as well, one in a couple of weeks, I think, so you can check them out on the Science Learning Hub website and all the resourcing there. So I think there's a lot of resourcing and continuing to be a lot of resourcing for educators. The challenge is that, the curriculum document should be one that encourages all teachers to take this up. And so I think, it is an election year, right? I get that right. I'm an Australian, so I'm a little bit one step removed. But yeah, I think that, we need to pay attention and we need to advocate for what we think is right. And that means, there are some calls for slowing this down. I mean, this is not something that I think we need to face as inevitable, which is what I say to people about the big push for AI everywhere now, right? We don't have to get on board with the language of inevitability that it must be this way because, the people have the power at the end of the day. We just have to get together and use it. So just keeping that in mind and that, yes, so, of course, teachers are always going to do what they have done, which is to make the most of a challenging situation, right? But at this point, we do actually have an opportunity to make our collective voices heard through elections and through continuing to give feedback and contacting your local MP, et cetera. So there's a lot that can still be done politically, and I think let's not lose sight of that either.
No, indeed. I am going to pull this to a close now just because we have gone on quite some time and we tried to be snackable, but that's all right. There's a lot to discuss and a lot we still haven't got to. I will pop onto this web resource some additional links to organizations and to Science Learning Hub and those sorts of spaces. Thank you, Leanne, for sending me some more stuff, so that it can be a kind of big collection place for you to look for some more further thinking around this material. And I think there are lots more events to come from other groups as well. Talk to your subject association, talk to your fellow kayako. And yeah, I've plugged the AEC Vision that we just launched last week as well for thinking about big picture education stuff and not being so sort of political football nature of things would be grand as well. Thank you, Leanne, for putting the dates in there. And I think it's nice too, Leanne, that you sort of gave us a nice positive reminder of the joyful nature that science can bring and that children do get stuck into and that can go on within your classrooms. And just to kind of hang on to that, what is the bit that's going to hook people into engaging with this in ways that are relevant and exciting to them and that do prepare them for those future skills. So thank you, everybody. Again, as ever, thank you to our lovely experts. Thanks, Sarah, to come first, not driving your car, but in your car. She's just such demand. She has to have her meetings from her car. As I said, everything will go up on the Substack very shortly, and I will update this link with those extra resources and connection points as well. Thank you, everybody. Kia tātou rangimarie, kia runga ina iwi o te ao. Ka kite, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Toodles! Let me get those.